Hello, and welcome to this very first edition of the Job Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Tim French, and over the course of this series, I will whisk you away to the Virtual Careers Fair, allowing you the opportunity to find out more about some of Britain's most interesting careers. This week, we are talking all things medical. I was lucky enough to catch up over Zoom with two young junior doctors to discuss some highs and lows of their profession. We had a really good chat about what it takes to be a medic, as well as hearing some funny stories that will make you realise we all have our good days and bad days. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, grab a cuppa, and cue the music. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome my guests today to the Job Hunter podcast, Matt Bradley and Tom McCain. Obviously, this is the first episode of the Job Hunter podcast. And as the title alludes to today, this week we are looking at what it takes to become a junior doctor. The hours of hard work and studying, the endless night shifts and everything in between. So firstly, how are you two doing today? What you guys been up to?
Good evening, Timmy. Yeah, not too bad at the moment. Just had some nice news about the COVID vaccine, so a little bit of positivity, a bit of optimism for us today. I'm currently in F2. I'm Matt. I'm currently on a GP rotation, basically.
So what does that mean on a rotation? If we're going to get technical for a little bit.
Tom and I are both on our second year of foundation doctors, basically. So for 2 years, you have a training program where you rotate around a different job every 4 months, essentially.
So you're on GP at the moment. Tom, what are you doing at the moment?
Hi, Timmy, I'm all right. I am doing A&E at the moment. I'm been trying to sleep today before my night shift this evening. So.
Going well for you, or are you struggling?
Oh, the first night is always a challenge. Been awake all day. A lot of FIFA, but you know.
So, did you guys always want to be doctors? Is it something you've always kind of thought you would get into, or what was the process that got you to being doctors? To be honest.
Do you want to go first? Go first, Micah.
Yeah. I think it's difficult because it's something that you don't have to choose early, but it is a lot easier. And obviously, if you do it like both of us did it straight out of school, you do have to have basically decided by the time you're about 16, which is way earlier than anything else. As to why, I'm not really sure. Like, there's loads of med school answers that everyone gives, and everyone has to answer that in their interview. But I think mine, it was probably more seeing my dad and seeing all that my family's friends, and it seemed like a pretty fun life and fairly interesting. So
how's that working out?
Well, yeah, it's pretty interesting, and generally I think, a lot of good people you meet, so not going too badly so far.
Yeah, for me it was pretty much similar. So like Matt kind of alluded to, we both came straight out of school. We've obviously all been to school together, and you kind of essentially pick your GCSEs based on the stuff you're enjoying at the time. So we were mostly people who are interested in science. I know both of us were, and then you kind of leads you onto your A levels, where you start focusing down onto, scientific A levels, and then starting to think about what you might do at uni, really. And you kind of end up on that path almost without realizing it a little bit. And then, you were at a school where there's a lot of medical students that come out of it. It's kind of a well-trodden path. We had great teachers that helped us out in terms of applications and stuff. And then you kind of end up there and just have to pass your exams, essentially.
I mean, it sounds like you guys kind of always knew. Like, to me, it seems really interesting that you kind of took a lot from what your families were doing, and obviously what your school was doing. But kind of, what would be the one bit of advice you'd give someone who, say, is 16 and thinking about a career in medicine, if they were thinking about it?
I'd say, obviously, you have to be interested in science stuff really, because that forms a lot of the basis of what you do at med school to begin with. Anyway, I know Macca's was probably a lot more scientific than mine was, but just follow the subjects you enjoy at that point really. And you know, there's a kind of a combination of subjects that seem to kind of work pretty well for ending up at med school. But it's not just one, you know, you can do loads of stuff, but I don't think you have to really know by the time you're 14, 15. It's just, you know, a kind of combination of subjects, and then being pretty good with people really is the other one, really, I'd say really.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that, like Mad said, our school and, you know, family and people we knew made it pretty easy, but actually for other people, it's a lot more difficult, kind of getting experience, doing all those sorts of things. And also, like, the idea isn't as much in your head. But yeah, definitely say the way that we did it in terms of straight from school is just not the only way to do medicine. Like, there's so many people who do it after a first degree, and there are other kind of things at the moment, like physicians associates and stuff as well, there's so many other things to do medicine as opposed to just doing it straight from school.
Yeah, definitely echo that 100%.
So I mean, that's really interesting that you kind of mentioned that there's so many different pathways. Obviously, in terms of when you get to university, what does it entail? Do you have to do sets and exams and practical and whatever to get there? And is there any other options you've got out there than doing the typical medical school route?
Yeah.
Go on, Mac. You want to go, Macca?
Well, yeah, I mean, the application for all medical schools, like, each of them require different tests or maybe just an interview. And that's changing all the time, basically. And they're even announcing loads more medical schools at the moment. I think this year there's loads of new ones. But also, what I was saying about doing it in a different way is that you can do graduate medicine. So you can just do any kind of scientific degree, 3 years. And then there are quite a few universities that do a kind of shorter medical course after that. So that's a good thing to do for people who maybe don't have the A-levels or maybe don't know what they want to do straight away. Go on.
I was just going to say, I'd add on to that for people, just whilst we were mentioning people that have done postgraduate like medicine. So once they've done a previous undergraduate degree and then moved in, they often make really good students as well as junior doctors as well, because they kind of got their stuff together a lot more than 18-year-olds at medical school have. They kind of know what they know how to learn at uni. They know how to get by in terms of just a bit more adult life. And have often got quite a lot to offer in terms of that. So yeah, it's definitely not just one way of going about it, really.
So, I mean, if we're talking about being a doctor, what is the progression, would you say? Well, what is the progression from being a junior doctor? You said you're an F2, so I guess that means you're in your second year of being a junior doctor. But when does that stop? When you stop being a junior and start being a senior? And what's the typical time frame that you get given to do all these things? And what does it mean?
So there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about what junior doctors mean over like this year, particularly with all the COVID stuff, and also previous years in terms of contracts, really. And it's kind of a misnomer, really, because junior doctors kind of technically means anything up to and including a registrar, which is basically anything that isn't a consultant, which is kind of your highest level of specialist doctor, basically. So a kind of basic way is really that you have 2 years of foundation training where you kind of rotate around those jobs, like I mentioned. Then there's a kind of natural gap, or you can go straight into more specialist training, which can last really any amount of time, between 3 years for going to a GP, or 8 years, 9 years onwards for being neurosurgeons, or different subspecialties, really.
Brilliant. So, Tom, if you had to describe to me what your typical day would like, you're saying you're about to go into a night shift, so 10 o'clock to 8, which I imagine is a bit of a graveyard shift. What does that really consist of? What if you were going to give people a bit of an insight into your day-to-day job, what would it look like?
Well, I mean, it changes depending on what rotation you're on, like we were just saying earlier. But for A&E at the moment, it is literally anyone who walks in the door. And you just obviously have to, supposedly work out what's going wrong with them, work out if they need to be in hospital, and try and help treat them, I guess. But it's very varied, whereas there are so many different kind of things you can do as a junior doctor. I mean, GP, Matt would probably say that it would be more kind of routine stuff. And then you working in the hospital on wards, it would be covering all the inpatients for a certain kind of speciality of medicine, or maybe a surgical thing. You might be going into theatre. So, I mean, there's so many different things that you could be doing. But yeah, A&E is difficult to describe, but it's basically just seeing new patients all the time and trying to work out where they need to go, essentially.
So is there a lot of like stabbing people in the chest with adrenaline and using defibrillators, and have you got House MD running around in the background telling you that you're doing it all wrong, or is it a lot more mundane?
It's usually quite a bit more mundane, I would say. But I mean, that people do need, and especially in A&E, there are people who need the extremes of medical care. And like the hospital that I work at is a trauma centre. So again, you can see people who are at the extremes of life or the most unwell. But most people, especially as a junior doctor, most people you see might be unwell, but it's not that exciting. It takes a long time to work out what's going on, and also a long time to make them feel better.
If someone comes in on a trauma call, Macca, how's it set up, and like what are you kind of contributing in that situation?
Well, as F2 SHO, probably not that much. It depends though. So there'll be a leader, there'll be a surgeon there. There'll be 2 sets of surgeons there, 3 nurses. And depending on how severe it is, then there'll be consultants there as well, radiologists, radiographers. So, I mean, that is kind of so different to the rest of medicine. It is almost like a kind of well-oiled machine, like the ones that I've seen that have gone well. They are basically arrive in A&E, and within 15 minutes, they know exactly what's wrong with them, and they've gone to theatre to fix it. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's more interesting for us just to kind of watch it at the moment. You don't get to do that much for those sorts of things. But
so would you say your experience differs, Matt? You said you're GP at the moment, aren't you?
At the moment, I think it's about as different as you can possibly imagine. Particularly at the moment, what we're in November, kind of just coming with this second wave of COVID. So GPs aren't really seeing many patients face to face. There's no classic interaction or consultations really that we've all grown up knowing as primary care has been delivered for however long. It's all telephone consultations really, which comes with their own difficulties really. Obviously, you've got to try and work out if someone's sick enough that they need to go to hospital whilst on the phone, which can sometimes be difficult. Trying to get, 80-year-olds people onto video calls is an absolute disaster. That's always a tricky one. It comes with its own issues, basically. It's a little bit isolating at the moment, I'd say, if I'm going to be honest. There's no kind of team interactions around the practice. It's tricky. It's not all 100 miles an hour like Macca's flying around A&E on a trauma call. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty slow. But you do get to speak to people for quite, for a little bit longer probably. And I've, even in the 3 months we've been in now, I've already seen the same people maybe 3 or 4 times. So you get to know them, even if it's just over the phone.
Do you ever wish there was those patients would potentially not ring up anymore? There's those times that they call because they're hypochondriacs and they're worrying so much about something that's nothing ultimately. So
yeah, there's a good proportion of worried well. I'm not going to lie, but they've all got a reason that they want to call up. So you do have to take it all seriously. And even if it's someone that's called up a million times before and it's not been anything particularly important, those people can still get ill, can't they? So you've got to kind of take everything as it, as if it was very serious. But obviously sometimes you are knocking your head against the desk at the same time.
I mean, obviously we're on the subject of your day-to-day work. Have you guys got any kind of funny stories that you can allude to or elaborate on from your time either as junior doctors or as when you're medical students? It'd be interesting to hear.
You got any, Macca?
I'd have to think. I don't know. I mean, A&E is a bit mental, especially night shifts can, you just have no idea what's going to come through, and it could be anything. And the amount of drunk, intoxicated people, but also just, in literally anything. I think literally the last set of nights I was just sat in the kind of main bit of A&E. A police officer kind of wanders in and he's like, guys, bloke outside who's running around Whitechapel High Street with no trousers on, that anything to do with you? And it just had to go, not really sure. And it turned out there'd actually been 2 people who were literally running around the street outside with no trousers on, proclaiming to be, all sorts of powerful individuals, which was pretty interesting. So then they get brought in. But I don't know. A&E is just anything comes in. So it's difficult trying to think of exact things. But yeah.
Well, I don't know how much you want to hear, Frenchie, and how much we're allowed to say on here, but there was always a few at med school which were pretty funny. I remember on one of my first placements in 3rd year at medical school. So that's when you just, you kind of got out of the lecture theatres, got out of the classrooms a little bit, and you start going into hospitals. I don't really have any responsibility. I remember being unbelievably hungover, essentially. And one of the doctors that we were shadowing, we weren't doing anything clinical myself. I remember we were going to get some sort of group teaching off one of the consultants. I'm pretty sure he clocked immediately that me and my mate weren't feeling too great. And so he was like, oh, guys, I'll come get you in a minute. I'll come get you in 5 minutes and do some teaching. And he went in and he did a PR examination on a patient, basically, which is a kind of an examination of a patient's back passage, essentially, to check, if they've got any mass, or I think they were bleeding when he went to the toilet. And he comes out and he hasn't washed his hands, he hasn't changed his gloves. And he just starts giving us this teaching session, waggling his finger well close to me and my mate. And I'm not kidding. I think he was just relishing in that, how much he knew we were just feeling so very sick at that point. It was honestly, it was dreadful.
You think you'll have more sympathy for any poor student medics you get in your hospital?
Having said that, though, we had some 3rd year medical students with us last year, and obviously they end up revising for exams, so often they have quite good knowledge about really specific things. And I was on an endocrine ward, and these 3rd year medical students knew a whole lot more than I did. It was quite embarrassing, to be honest.
That's right. I used to make them make you look good. Because
I just offer them the floor.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is probably going to be quite a hard question, but what exactly makes you get out of bed every day? What about this job do you think makes you get out of bed?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it's difficult at the moment for both of us, because when you're rotating, you're not doing the job that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of being a junior doctor, you are basically working towards, and I'm sure it's the same for, loads of professions, but you're working towards a career when you are the specialist in exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment you are just, you're supposedly being trained and you're hopefully learning things, and it can still be fun, but you are sometimes going to have to work in departments or in parts of medicine that you don't particularly want to do. So you've got to be kind of quite long-term focused, I think, because it can be pretty difficult when you have loads of night shifts or lots of difficult or boring work. You do need to have a kind of long, or be quite good at looking in the long term, I think, to enjoy it.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you're at school at the end of term, it was coming up to Christmas, and you've clocked off and no one's doing any work for 2 weeks before Christmas holidays, and you're just watching films and you're not really paying attention. Sometimes if you don't really keep a bit focused, if you're in a job that you're not particularly enjoying, or that you're not going to be doing for the rest of your life, basically, it's quite easy just to switch off a little bit. So you do have to, like you say, kind of keep focused on the long term a little bit. Keep in mind what, there are reasons you're doing it, but obviously there are, good things that come out of any of the jobs as well. There are good moments when, you might diagnose something on a night shift that, you're quite impressed with yourself, or, you treat this person, they do get better kind of over the next few minutes, and, they might have been quite unwell, and then you kind of keep them better until the slightly more senior doctor can come in. Even these small victories are pretty good sometimes, but sometimes they do seem quite few and far between, to be honest. And the other thing is you don't often get a huge amount of feedback about there's obviously meant to be structured feedback about stuff, like you have portfolios that you're meant to complete throughout the year, but basically they're essentially tick box exercise. But the kind of the real victories, like I was just mentioning, a lot of the time no one really tells you if you've done right or wrong on those things. So you do have to be quite introspective and kind of back yourself on these sorts of things sometimes, because no one's going to say, yeah, that was quality, well done.
So if you had to think about it, what would be your like end goal in your job? Where do you want to get to?
So I'd like to do surgery. I think I want to do orthopedics, but I'm not certain. But I think surgery, one way or another. So you end up kind of focusing a lot of the things you do around that. You have to go on courses, you have to do exams. There's no set time frame in which to do them, but earlier the better a lot of the time. And then you kind of throughout your rotations, hopefully you'll have a surgery. These rotations over these 2 years, I had a couple of rotations on orthopedics, so that was quite good, and I kind of learned a lot on there. And then you apply for training, like I was saying earlier. You've got surgical training, and then more and more specialist training after that, and eventually, like Mac said, you end up kind of aiming to be a consultant in a particular specialty, really.
Yeah, I don't think I'm as decided as Matt, but I don't know, probably not surgery, so medicine, which always makes people, it's always difficult to explain to people, because if people think, oh, being a doctor, it's all medicine. But I think when they basically mean hospital medicine, so specialists, so cardiologists or lung respiratory doctors, so some sort of medical specialty, but at the moment undecided. And I think that's quite common. It's very difficult to decide when you don't do it all the time. And
the thing about the foundation rotations, it's essentially a job lottery. And if you don't kind of land on something that you really, really like, it can seem pretty bleak and hard to work out what you want to do. And, some people come out of med school thinking they know exactly what they want to do, and some people haven't got a Scooby, basically. So everyone finds these things at different times, but essentially it's only in the last few months I've kind of really come around to what I think I want to do as well. So they don't come overnight, basically.
So what do you guys kind of do as a coping mechanism for all this, coping with the pressure of your job, the progression, and just day to day, looking after people and what that entails? How do you get through that?
So I don't know, there's a few different pressures on there. And to be honest, I think sometimes it gets overrated. So you do have to keep a bit of perspective on it. I don't think I go around all day, every day feeling like the world, the weight of the world on my shoulders, basically. Sometimes you have pressure, and you get it in all walks of life, in all jobs, pressure of, you need to do this portfolio thing. You need to get this little bit done to get through to the end of the, 4-month block, or, you need to go to this conference to get this thing ticked off. Or there's the other pressure of care provision, essentially, and the patients that you have and your responsibilities in terms of them, which kind of, they come, for me anyway, they come kind of short and sharp. You don't really, I don't go around all day thinking, oh my God, I'm on this ward and I'm currently responsible for these patients. But if something goes wrong, then you do kind of feel very responsible. And if someone becomes unwell, that's when you feel a little bit of pressure. And as long as you kind of, you're pretty aware of your limitations, as long as you're asking for help at the right times, there's the limit of what can go wrong, really.
Yeah, I think I agree with Matthew. There's different pressures. There's the pressures of a system that is struggling, or in coronavirus, or in any time. I think any winter in the last 5 years, you can look at it and the NHS has struggled. So trying to kind of work through that. And I guess you sit in A&E, I'm sure you sit in GP as well, but A&E, you're pressured to do things quickly because the whole hospital relies on A&E, getting people out or getting people in quickly and stuff like that. But then I think you have to kind of detach yourself from that, because there's nothing you can do about that, essentially. You just do your job. And then in terms of patients, sometimes, I think you have bit of personal responsibility, but like Matt said, as long as you are sensible, don't do anything you can't do. And, there's a limit to how personally responsible you can feel. You obviously want to make them better and help them, but you can't let it overtake your life, because then, it's what you do every day. So if you do that every day, it's, I think, too emotionally draining.
Obviously, as you go along, like through kind of, we're only a year and a bit into a job that's going to last a long time, hopefully. You kind of accrue these different experiences of, these are quite often difficult experiences. So, the first time you see a patient have a cardiac arrest and you can't do anything about it, or, this year with COVID, the first time you deal with a patient with COVID who is getting more and more unwell in front of you, and there's essentially nothing you can really do. These are tough experiences, obviously, but you do get to know how to deal with them, and you take from them what you can in terms of what can you do better, what did you not do particularly well, what did you do well. Like I was saying, often people don't say what you did well. You kind of have to work it out a little bit yourself. And then, separation from it when you get home, essentially. I'm all right for switching off, to be honest. So I'm not too bad at that, but I know some people manage differently to how I do, to be honest.
Is there any support for you guys? I imagine a large proportion of your job is just being kind of a shoulder to cry on and speak to. What support do you guys get as doctors to help cope with other people's problems?
I don't know about you, Macca, but it's quite limited, I feel. I don't think there's a huge amount.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of systems that are meant to be in place, and there's, you have supervisors and you have colleagues, and then there are kind of overall people in charge of whatever hospital you're at or whatever. But I think it depends. I mean, I haven't tried to use the things, but I don't think there's loads from people who have gone to, certain supervisors or whatever. Not everyone is trained to be a pastoral advisor either, these supervisors who you have. And so I think it varies a lot. I think there are some practitioners' health things. I think as NHS, as doctors, you can basically there's special GPs and psychiatrists who will see you sooner if you are actually kind of properly unwell or really struggling. But luckily haven't had to use that at the moment.
There are some good disparate services. For example, the BMA, which is kind of the British Medical Association, was kind of our support basically, provide free counselling for junior doctors and medical students, I know. But like Mac was saying, we have kind of nominated supervisors kind of within our clinical area. So on the ward, which is generally a consultant in the area you're working in, and also an educational kind of more overarching supervisor who generally, they're the only reason you interact. You don't have anything clinically to do with them, and they're meant to be there in terms of support for you. But, like Tom was saying, they're not all trained in the things they should be able to do. And, if you need those sorts of services, if you are really struggling, obviously access is essentially the most important thing, because people in those sorts of, crises aren't going to be able to, aren't going to want to look around for hours on end and work out how they get through all this red tape and stuff. So there is a limit to the support, but also you have to be open yourself. Whoever you're living with, it's important to talk to them and things. And then things within the kind of wards and stuff, like I mentioned earlier with cardiac arrests, there's generally a more of a push to have debriefs and things. I don't know what you have, Macca, but I know they're trying to introduce them, but it's kind of a bit of hit and miss at the moment. So that would be where after everyone kind of converges on a cardiac arrest afterwards, whether it's gone well or not so well. In theory, meant to have these debriefs where you discuss everything, how it's gone, and make sure everyone's okay, basically. But I don't know how successful they've been with you. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, actually, I have said, been rather noted, but actually A&E that I'm doing at the moment is really good. I mean, we have a specific A&E psychologist who's just for the staff. And every week there's a team time, and after any kind of like cardiac arrest or any kind of stressful event, there probably would be a debrief led by one of the consultants. So I think it really depends on the team you're working in, and definitely A&E at the moment has a quite a good team atmosphere, I think, because there are so many traumatic things and it is so stressful that otherwise it would be. Yeah.
That was important conversation, but it was a little bit heavy. So I'm going to try and bring it up a bit. There must be some perks to this job. It can't all be doom and gloom. What is the one perk you can think of to being a doctor?
Yeah, I'm sorry if we've come across negatively in a bit solemn. It is good, mate. It has really good aspects as well. Obviously, it's nice to be in the paid world of work, which is always a good thing. Job security is pretty good, and there's pretty bad lows, but there are really good highs as well. If someone's really unwell and you even fix them just a little bit, that's worth a hell of a lot. So the highs where you wouldn't really expect when they come, if someone says, "Oh, you've done pretty well there," it's really nice. So there are good parts to it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't queue for any supermarkets in lockdown, so.
Amazing. So I mean, that's got me sold. It. I mean, if there's ever a reason to be a doctor, it's to jump the queues. Might be wrong there.
You got a clap every week as well. That's pretty cool.
I mean, did that really make you feel good, getting a clap every week?
I quite enjoyed it to begin with, and then it just became quite, I don't know, these things as they go on kind of lose the meaning, don't they? And I don't know, I didn't feel like I was doing a huge amount because a lot of the time I didn't have a lot of work to do anyway, so
you're a sham.
I wasn't quite sure if I deserved it.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you could transport yourself back to being that kind of 16-year-old self, does your expectations match what you expected it to be, if that makes sense? If you take what you know now as being a doctor and apply it to what you thought it would be like when you were 16, do the two match up?
Yeah, I don't know about you, Matt. I don't think I've thought about this period.
No.
I think because this is a very temporary kind of bit, and like I said, you basically have to look forward. No one thinks about this period of being a doctor or like even medical school to an extent. Like you think about the fun bits of being at uni, but you don't think about being in medical school. So yeah, I guess you don't really think about those sorts of things. So I agree. I don't know if it'd be that helpful too. It depends, but you basically have to get through it if you want to get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think being negative and thinking, "Oh, I don't want to be a doctor because being an F1 and F2 is quite hard," I think that'd be a bit of a shame if that put everyone off it.
Yeah. Like you say, to be honest, I didn't even really understand how these intermediate kind of years even worked, even like 2 years ago. Do you know what I mean? This kind of all seems so complex and kind of separate to where you are at the time. It kind of all just gradually appears as you go through it, to be honest. So you do some work experience maybe when you're 15 and you generally spend time with a consultant, and that's kind of essentially what you imagine it to be, I guess. And you don't see a huge amount of the kind of dog's body work that you do when you're in the first couple of years. So I agree with Macca really in that regard. Yeah, that's what I'd say really.
It's been absolutely fascinating. If I can ask you one last question to both of you, I like to call this podcast the Virtual Careers Fair. If you could throw yourself back to that 16-year-old self, you're wandering around the sports hall with all these different stands up with loads of different careers, and you at the opposite side of the table this time doing the recruiting, what's the kind of 3 attributes that you would say make up a doctor, and how would you really give that sales pitch to someone who wants to be a doctor?
I wouldn't pick 3 specific things. Like there's so many different, and it like literally the difference between an orthopedic surgeon and a palliative care consultant, there's so many different careers in medicine that like getting just the same people is just not helpful and not what the NHS needs or the health service needs. Like, it just needs loads of different people, and like, you need to have some scientific knowledge, and you need to have like varying levels of being good with people. But there is so much more than just like one set of person who can be a good doctor or who can be a doctor in any way. And I think that's probably will be realised in terms of like universities and stuff as well. I think it probably is changing.
Yeah,
from the kind of very strict scientific stuff.
Medical school candidates all seem to have to funnel into a certain set of characteristics basically to get through the whole process. But like Max says, it's not a particularly helpful way of looking at things, because not everyone that becomes a doctor or goes through medical school ends up working in a ward setting. There are loads of people in, labs and GPs and, all these different kind of setups. So it's as far apart as you can imagine, to be honest. I'd say being a nice person is always pretty handy, but that's probably a handy thing in life. And to be honest, I probably can't even say that about myself a huge amount of the time.
Or some people we've worked with, I'm sure.
So it's clearly not a prerequisite.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure having both of you on the show today. Honestly, I couldn't have thought of a better pair of people to have on for this first episode. If you guys want to give a shout out or anything, feel free to now. But I just want to say a massive thank you for you coming on and putting up with me for 35 minutes. So yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Yes, Frenchie, it's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries, Frenchie. Been a pleasure.
So there you have it. Life as a junior doctor. Perhaps not as glamorous as the films make out, but what really came across was the passion that both Tom and Matt share for their jobs. Once again, I'd like to say a massive thank you to them both for coming on, and to all our healthcare professionals out on the front line. The NHS truly is a cornerstone of our society, and as you can hear, it's full of some top-class people. I really do hope you've enjoyed listening to this first episode, and tune in next Wednesday as I continue my tour of the Virtual Careers Fair. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Job Hunter podcast wherever you get your fix, and leave a review as it helps others to find us. You can also find us on Twitter at Job Hunter Pod, on Facebook at Job Hunter Podcast, where we'll also have a support group for those wanting more information. And finally, you can drop me an email if you want to find out more, or perhaps you want to be on the show. It's jobhunterpodcast@gmail.com. I've been Tim French, and this has been the Job Hunter Podcast. See you next week.